WOLFMAN is a 1941 Universal monster movie directed by George Waggner, and it stars Lon Chaney Jr. as the title character. For those of you who don't know what the movie is about, it's about a man named Larry Talbot who goes back to his hometown after the death of his brother to kind of reconcile with his dad, Sir John Talbot. And while he's there, he goes on a date with this girl named Gwen, and that night he actually gets attacked and bitten by a werewolf, and then soon becomes a werewolf himself. I love the Wolfman for a lot of reasons, but mainly because Dracula and the Wolfman were the first Universal monster movies. They're the first scary movies I was really allowed to watch when I was a kid, just because they didn't have an R rating. They weren't rated at all, so I could kind of watch whatever. They always hold a special place in my heart just for that reason. And the reason why the Wolfman spoke to me and I kind of wanted to speak about it more than the other Universal monster movies is because the Wolfman is the most tragic of all the Universal monster movies. The character of the Wolfman is the most human of all the Universal monsters. Also because he is human, he doesn't choose to be a monster, he just kind of gets forced into it. And which is why you just immediately, at least I, sympathize for the character of Larry Talbot, and I want to see the curse lifted from him. The movie also does a great job of talking about the themes of the duality of man and how we all have an animal inside of us that's just waiting to claw itself out. And, such themes we've seen in art like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They kind of go hand in hand together, the Wolfman and Jekyll and Hyde. But it's just all about how we all have an evil side of us and a good side of us, and how those can kind of conflict. The Wolfman came at a time where Universal just absolutely needed another hit. They were kind of fizzling out in their monster franchise. They created the character of the Wolfman to kind of revitalize things and keep the franchise going, and that it did, because it spawned 4 more sequels where Lon Chaney Jr. reprised his role of the Wolfman. I want to talk about Jack Pierce's iconic Wolfman makeup because it looks so good. It is so beautiful. I mean, I love it so much because it actually looks like literally a man turned into a wolf. Because a lot of movies now, it literally just looks like all wolf and there's no man there. Something about it just cooled me. Jack Pierce also inspired many generations of special effects artists that we would have not have gotten if he wasn't around, like Rick Baker. He actually did the 2010 Wolfman remake, which is pretty cool. The very first transformation scene is so badass. I mean, you get to see Lon Chaney Jr. from the waist high, and he's kind of freaking out, and you see shots of his legs, and he is progressively getting hairier and hairier. I'm sure it was some sort of stop motion that they did to achieve that effect, until he stands up eventually and kind of walks off, but he has this kind of wolf hunch in his feet, which I think is just kind of a cool small detail that they threw in there. The acting in the movie is also so good. I mean, the last 2 movies I talked about, Demons and Suspiria, the acting was not very top tier, but it's not really what you come to those movies for. But that is not the case in this movie. I mean, all around, especially from Lon Chaney Jr., he delivers such a charismatic performance as Larry Talbot, as well as being a tragic hero at the same time, which is something I feel like the 2010 remake was kind of missing from Benicio del Toro. It just lacked that personality that Lon Chaney Jr. just possessed so well. Also, Claude Rains as Sir John Talbot in the movie, he delivers such an authentic and real performance. I mean, it seemed like if you were in his position, this is how you would react to your son being like, "Oh my god, I'm turning into a werewolf at night, Dad, hello." Evelyn Ankers plays the very attractive shopkeeper Gwen, who happens to be Larry's love interest in the movie. And she is so essential to the plot. I mean, she is fantastic. And I feel like her character is also kind of ahead of its time for 1941. Bela Lugosi also stars in the movie, and I love seeing Bela Lugosi in any of the Universal monster films because he's just such a legend. He's great, as always. But he plays a gypsy in the movie, who's also named Bella, of course. But I just love the acting that he does with his face and his eyes. I mean, the way his eyes just go wide and the facial expressions he has are just so terrifying, and they always scared the shit out of me as a kid. I hope I don't butcher her name, but Maria Ospensky, She plays the main gypsy who kind of warns Larry about his lycanthropy, and she has some of the most iconic lines in the entire movie.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
The sets for the film also look gorgeous. I mean, they're so well done, and I know today for most modern audiences, they might be like, well, what's the big deal? You know, they don't look that good. But to me, like, they have so much charm about them, you know, especially with the small budget they were working with. Speaking of small budget, the violence in the movie is very minimal because they didn't have the amount of money to be able to show on screen the violence that was happening with the werewolf. What they had to do was kind of imply it to the audience and make the audience kind of imagine something worse than what they could show, which I think is such a smart filmmaking technique. I was talking about the smaller budget they had to work with earlier, so the reason why was because the beginning of Wolfman's production also coincided with the beginning of the U.S.'s involvement in World War II, and so most of the nation's money was going towards the war efforts and not really towards, you know, Hollywood and filmmaking. The money that they did have, they kind of had to scrounge up and figure out along the way, but that's why they couldn't have as grand sets, and they had to reuse a lot of the sets later on in their films. The fact that they were able to pull off something like the Wolfman during this hard time, during the war, just inspires me so much as a filmmaker, because it just goes to show that a little amount of money can go such a long way. The Wolfman is my favorite from the Universal Monster movie franchise by far, and I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 stars. I think this is such a perfect movie. So if you haven't seen it, I would definitely highly recommend going and checking it out. I would also recommend going to check out the other lineup of Universal Monster movies. Thank you guys so much again for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode of 31 Days of Horror.